guys, what's happening? Welcome to another episode of Indie Invasion. Today we are doing another interview. As usual, I am joined by the amazing, the perplexing, the fantastic Eric, wearing his CoastalCon shirt supporting our independent gaming convention that will be February 27th and 28th of 2021, barring any COVID madness. Fingers crossed with that one. And today we are joined by Opti. Now, I want to say hello, Opti.
Hey, how's it going?
And
hello.
We are doing this one because, as you guys know, we love to talk about indie games. And this one is a brand new one that is currently on Kickstarter, funded in hour and 15 minutes. Hour and 15 minutes.
Awesome. As I was still cutting and pasting social media.
You gotta love that. You gotta love that. And the game is Gangs of the Undercity. And It is, I don't want to say it's an homage to Shadowrun, but if you liked Shadowrun, it definitely has that flavor. And we're really excited about it. You guys are up to, I believe, 51,000 right now.
Nice. I didn't know that. We got a little bit more since the last time I looked. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's really awesome. And unfortunately, as is typical for you guys watching, it's a Kickstarter, and if you know at least me, it's getting very expensive for me the more things get unlocked.
That's what I like to hear.
Getting more expensive for me. But what we're going to do is we're just going to dive into this because I'm really intrigued by this. When it came up in one of the Cyberpunk Facebook groups that I saw, I said, oh my gosh, what is this? I got to check this out. Clicked on it and just scrolled down saying to myself, yep, got to have that. Gonna need some of those. Definitely need that. I already know where I'll put that on my shelf, kind of stuff. So,
if you haven't got the hit, Mac, don't hold back.
No, I can't do it, man. I can't do it. So anyway, Opti, tell us, how did you get started in the whole wide world of gaming? What was your gateway? How did you get here?
The very first thing ever was third grade. And I had a friend named Michael. And I say friend, but he wasn't really a friend. He was just the other nerd in the class. So we sort of like hung out by necessity. But one of these days I went out and it was on recess. Remember recess? Gosh, I haven't thought about recess in a long time. But well, I went out and it was like a Wednesday or maybe a Friday. I don't remember. But he wasn't where he normally was. And I walked all around the campus looking for him. And I finally found him, and it was him and like three other people. They were huddled against a corner. They were all like this, around something. And I was like, what are they doing? And so I went over there, and they were rolling dice, and they had a bunch of papers and books. And I was like, what are you guys doing? We're playing D&D. And I was like, what's D&D? And they're like, Dungeons and Dragons. I was like, what is that? Right, and they told me, and I remember like, well, I'm in. And I remember going back home and saying, Mom, I want to play D&D. And we went to this store in the mall and bought a bunch of books. I think I bought the first book I ever got was maybe the Red Box.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, how many times we've heard that on this show.
Yeah, it was a while ago. And then, of course, back then I didn't know the difference between basic and advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And so, I was just a third grade kid. I didn't really quite understand everything. So I kind of got more mileage out of the monster manuals. And one of my favorite books of all time is a book called Legends and Lore. It was the gods and the heroes, book with all the stats for the gods and heroes. And I swear I read that book until it fell apart.
Oh yes.
So yeah, that was my real intro into gaming.
I think we need like a little disclaimer up in the corner because everybody says the same thing.
No Stairway to Heaven. Yeah,
me too. It's all the same thing. It's Red Box. I remember coloring my dice.
Yes.
To get the colors, that was what you had to do.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Okay. So okay, do you remember your first character's name?
Oh shoot. Oh wow.
This was a trick question.
That question. Yeah, I've never thought about that. Nobody's ever asked that. Let me see. It must have been. No, I have no idea.
Well, now you can percolate on that, and maybe you can come up with it farther down the road.
I can't even remember what class it was.
I I
Mine
remember
was probably something like Kevin or Bob or some just average name.
mine.
I
Mine
remember
was
my
Buckle.
second character.
Okay, well, who's that?
My second character was a Minotaur because I called him Kaz because I had just read The Legend of Huma, right? Those
Yep.
Dragonlance books, and so I was really pumped about that. So I named a Minotaur named Kaz. But gosh, you really stumped me. Now I was like thinking, like, what's wrong with me that I can't remember my first D&D character?
Just derailed the entire interview.
Yeah.
My
I can
What was
remember
yours,
all
Matt?
14 characters I made for TMNT and Other Strangeness, but I can't remember my first D&D character.
Mine was Fundle, and he was a dwarf. That was
Nice.
my very
That's a
first
dwarfy name.
That was
I like
Fundle. It was a chart that the guy had created, and I was like, wait a minute, the first half of my name is Fun. I'm not sure that I
Fun doll. Yeah.
Fundle, yeah, the dwarf. So that was my first character in D&D, and
Awesome.
also Redbox. I remember. All right, Eric, take it away. What you got next, buddy?
All right, so your game is set in like the cyberpunk type of environment.
Yeah.
What basically inspired you to create this game in that setting?
Okay, so there's a couple answers to that question. The setting itself is something that we created, and so once we started going a direction, there was no other options. But the reason that we decided to do a cyberpunk fantasy game at all has its origins in 2012 and what was called the Year of Shadowrun.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah. So Shadowrun 5th edition sort of rebooted. It was the year where in universe the awakening happened in Shadowrun, right? So it was a big year. They released 5th edition, and they had plans to release all sorts of stuff. They had they had an online game tie-in. They had Shadowrun Returns Kickstarter for video game, that isolinear video game, which is just fantastic by Harebrained Schemes. They had plans for a board game. What was it called? Corporate Takeover, I think. And then they had plans for a miniatures game called Sprawlgangers. And I was really, really heavily at that point, probably for the last 15 years, heavily into Warhammer Fantasy. And so I was playing the heck out of that. And it was around the time when Sprawlgangers was supposed to come out that Games Workshop kind of blew up the entire Warhammer Fantasy universe, literally.
Right,
like it's just, what are you doing? It was like I was all in. Like I was one of those guys that had all the books and all my armies had like, you know, themed things and written stories from. I was like, I hate you guys.
I said, my Brytonians.
Right, it's exactly. It's like, what am I gonna do with this garage full of wood elves? So anyway, I thought, you know what, that's okay because Sprawlgangers is coming out. And I'll play that instead. I'll devote all my hobby energy to Sprawlgangers. So I started buying, you know, things I could make into buildings and stuff for terrain. I was just super pumped, super all in. And I was already playing Shadowrun at this point with my home game. And then fast forward to like a year later, and I'm on the playtest team, and I was like, hey, what's going on with this? And then soon the playtest dried up. I ended up becoming part of the Catalyst demo team. So I went to conventions and, you know, ran Shadowrun games for them. At this point, I already had a Shadowrun podcast called the Neo-Anarchist Podcast, which is an in-character history podcast of Shadowrun, which was pretty popular. And I used that as an in to get in to be a freelance writer for the Shadowrun RPG. So I was doing that all in. And at a certain point, probably about 2 years ago, it became pretty clear as I was talking with the bosses that Sprawlgangers was just not going to happen. 6 or 7 years later, and this game that I had put all of my hobby effort into, despite it not being anything, was not going to happen. And so, you know, the old saying goes, if you can't find what you want, then, you know, build it yourself.
Sure.
So that if I wanted a cyberpunk fantasy miniatures game, it turned out I was just going to have to make it myself. So that was the origin of Gangs of the Undercity.
That's a good origin story. We actually, one of the things that I found compelling about it, and didn't even realize I would find compelling about it until we did our last interview, which we did with actually my cousin. He's a guy who created his own RPG. It's called Planet Bound. And one of the things that he said in the interview was he loved fantasy, but he wanted something sci-fi. So like you just said, he had to create his own game. Now it's nothing, it's not cyberpunk or anything,
Sure.
But that was what compelled me when I looked at Gangs of the Undercity. I was like, everybody loves dwarves and goblins and I hate elves, but yeah, but it's
we give
okay.
you plenty more reasons to hate elves. Yeah.
Because I can kill them in the game, so that's okay. And orcs, and I love that. But then that cyberpunk element was really cool because I had explored it a little bit with Reality's Edge. And that's a great book. It's a great set of rules.
It's a solid set of rules.
It really is. But over the course of time, what I have experienced, we've talked about it a couple of different times, is there's a lot of miniatures agnostic games out there right now, and they're great. I love them. I love that you can do that with your collection. But what I kind of found for myself was that I want at least a few models that the game gives you, because then I feel like I'm tied into it. And then, much like with your guys' campaign system and being able to build your own gangers and everything, you can add those models, but there's those core guys that you can buy. And I really find those to be so much more compelling to get into, even if there's just a handful, 1, 2 gangs, whatever, but just a little bit of tie-in for that, for me anyway. So,
I agree with you. There's something about, say what you will about Games Workshop, and I will, but there's something to showing up at a Games Workshop event and seeing all of these models that fit together in the universe and just look awesome, like on a table, right? Versus showing up and everybody's got everything from, HeroClix to Zombicide to, to Games Workshop, for Games Workshop in the 90s and then Games Workshop today. Like, so it seems a little weird, but one of the things we wanted to do was absolutely create great minis in the first place, so something that somebody would say, I'm going to make a golden demon out of that. We were aiming for that quality.
Well, I can assure you, I am not going to make a golden demon out of any of them.
That's all right.
But
Neither am I.
But I will paint some of them.
Excellent.
There's a few of them I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about Spur. That's the one I want.
Spur, he's a cool one.
That's who I'm excited about. But so to introduce us to gangs of the Undercity, this is the part where we don't care how long you take.
Okay.
Tell us about what we're getting into, what this wonderful world you guys have created is, and walk us into it.
Okay, so Gangs of the Undercity is wait, I'm what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna pull up my script, right, for my elevator pitch. That way I can just talk
don't
forever.
Do the elevator pitch yet. That's later.
So Gangs of the Undercity is essentially a cyberpunk fantasy miniatures skirmish war game. Is that a mouthful or what?
That's a good mouthful. I like it.
But if you like games like Infinity or Necromunda or Mordheim, those kind of games where you get to have a handful of miniatures on each side, and there's a campaign where you sort of work your way through, and characters rise and characters fall and gain abilities and get injured and all that kind of stuff. That's sort of what we were aiming for. But part of my hobby is also competition, right? So like getting your stuff painted and taking it to Adepticon or whatever, and doing the big tournaments. I also like that. I also like the miniatures, which have incredible detail and pro painters can do a lot with. So for me, it was the entire hobby that I loved about Warhammer, mixed with the themes that I really loved about my role-playing games. So the cyberpunks and the magic and the fantasy elements. So that's what you're getting with Gangs of the Undercity. You're getting cyberpunk, fantasy, competitive war game, campaign mode, and beautiful miniatures.
And the campaign mode, Eric will back me up on this one. That is huge to a lot of people now, because being able to actually have a narrative in your game versus saying that you have a narrative. Now, let me explain what I mean by that.
Sure.
Some games will say, oh, well, you have this narrative, you have this story. It's our story. Follow our story and play. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to take Gangs of the Undercity and I'm going to slice out a corner of Neo Babylon.
Yes.
It's going to be mine.
And it's going to be yours.
Create in that sector what I want in the game. And those campaign mechanics do such a great job of allowing people to do that. So thank you for creating a campaign
Yes,
mechanic.
of course. I'm glad. I mean, even though I told you not to read that far, you read some of the campaign stuff, and
I did, but I don't care how it works. I just know there is one. I just know there is one. That's all I care about. I don't even care how it works, because
that's one of the things that we decided to do is, we have an RPG plan down the road in this universe, and what we wanted to do is separate that world, the greater world that Neo Babylon fits into, from the Undercity. And what we want to do with the Undercity is make it as big as possible, like this huge underground, subterranean, destitute sprawl, but make it so big that no gang could possibly control it all. Right. That means every single time somebody creates a new gang, there's absolutely room somewhere in the Undercity for that gang. So anybody can create their own gang and insert it into the lore with no problems. That's one of our design goals for gang creation.
Now, can you tell our listeners, tell us about Neo Babylon a little bit? I know I would like to point out real quick, and I'll throw a link up in the description of the video, that you guys have some great videos up on YouTube that I've been listening to that are telling the story. And they're really cool. They're really well done. They're fun to listen to while you're painting, particularly because you don't have to watch anything. So you can paint something and just listen. That'll tell you all kinds of stuff about it. But can you give our listeners just a little flavor of what they're getting into with Neo Babylon?
Yeah. So one of the things that, and this is, I think, important for us to do, is to differentiate ourselves from Shadowrun quite a bit. But the big difference between Shadowrun and our world is, in Shadowrun, you had magic that goes in cycles. In our world, we just said, what if magic had always existed, right? Like, just go back as far as you want and say magic is there for the taking. We figured that if that was the case, then maybe it was Babylon that was the first to figure out how to work this. I mean, we go back there, and the first spell books we have are from the Babylonian, or the Akkadian, Sumerian. So we thought, what if they had this? And what if under Nebuchadnezzar II, they were the first to harness magic and use it on a global scale in order to affect, the outcome of war and whatnot. Right. So in our world, that's the big point of divergence. The Babylonian Empire gained magic knowledge and started taking over everywhere. They lasted for 1,000 years and absorbed magic knowledge of everybody, and just had an undue influence. If you want to think about it this way, how the Roman Empire had a really large influence on the West, right? In our world, basically take out Rome and put Neo-Babylon in, and Neo-Babylon had that sort of influence, both culturally and magically and mythologically, on the old world, in the same way that maybe Rome and the Egyptians and the Chinese did on the old world in our real world. Right. So that was the starting point. At a certain point, there was an event called the Shattering, and everybody in Neo-Babylon sort of spread out. And so Neo-Babylonian culture and mythology affects all aspects of the world of Gangs of the Undercity. About 400 years ago in our timeline, a city called Neo-Babylon was created, and this sort of stands apart in a new continent in between the old world and the new. And so this new continent has all sorts of cool stuff to explore, but right in the middle of it is Neo-Babylon, and that's where basically the world gets ruled from. And underneath it is a vast Undercity, which is the setting for our game.
Right.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Now
that's as quick as I can hit all the high points.
No, that's good because I
could be here all day.
As much as I would love to let you be here all day, I want to direct people to the YouTube to listen to it, because it's really well done, and I encourage you, even if the cyberpunk genre isn't your thing, I think you'll enjoy listening to it, because it's quite well done, and it's a good story. I've been listening to it. I'm almost done.
Cool.
I have 5.
We have 3 episodes of what's called Subversive Arcana, and that's the detail, the story of our world. But if you go to our YouTube channel, there's also an audio drama called Undercity, which is sort of an audio drama lead-in to our game Gangs of the Undercity.
Awesome.
Following a set of characters in the Undercity.
Awesome. Eric?
All right. So one of the things I noticed is some of the unique things that you have built into the game, some of the standout stuff. So I mean, you have the D6 system, you have the spells, and then you have your 3x3 board, kind of standard type of things. But some of the stuff that stood out to us after going through it is like the grit. Mac, you wanted to bring up the grit, aspect of the game, which that really sucked you in, and I thought that was an interesting mechanic in the game, and how like scenario based, it's a set amount, but there's different ways that you can either earn it and lose it, spending it on different abilities. We both thought that was a really cool mechanic that you guys built into the game.
Yeah, almost like a resource management, which gives you a little bit of control over the random element of the dice. Is what it feels like to me.
Yeah, and I think one of the big reasons for that is, again, tournament play. You would go to a tournament and everything would swing on this one roll.
Right.
And no matter how many dice you had, right, they all come up ones, and you're just like, what's that about, right? So I thought, like, what if we could give a way to mitigate some of that stuff in a way, but also do something different with. I can't take full credit with this because my team came up with the other side of this. And let me just back up. Grit is a resource that you have at the beginning of each scenario. You get a certain amount of grit based on the scenario and the choices you made for your game. Over time, the grit comes and goes. Each turn you lose some. You might do some actions that gain you some. Killing a model might lose them some. And my team came up with this idea that when you run out of grit, right, which is your sort of will to fight, your courage, then your team just says, you know what, I'm done. We're getting our butts kicked here. Like we're out, right?
Game over, man.
Yeah, it really once they floated that, it was like, oh man, that really brings a sense of urgency to this, right? And you can't just throw all of your grit at something, because you might win that round, but then you're done, right? You're done the next time, anytime something bad happens. So it does become this sort of push and pull, and you absolutely need to use it, because if you don't, you'll get wrecked. But if you use it too much, then you will, you'll just lose.
Right.
So yeah, it was a really cool ebb and flow mechanic, and yeah, the resource management in addition to the dice rolling and the stats, we thought that was pretty fantastic. So thank you for saying that. That's one of our favorite parts.
Yeah, it was definitely unique, and I had mentioned to you earlier before we came on that it's hard to create anything unique in the gaming world right now, just because there's so much great stuff out there.
Yeah,
there's a lot of overlap, so it's always nice to see that. Then that's all it takes to really bring appeal to a game, is just something a little bit different to make somebody go, oh, that would be cool to have and play through. So that's always a nice thing. What else you got there?
I think it makes your individual games unique too. It gives it character, because there's so many moments during that game that you can choose when to spend it or not. So like you said, it's that fine balance. So it'll make every gaming experience unique.
Yeah. And you could choose to use it to fix one of your screw ups, or you can choose to say, like, I'm going to use it on this particular spell or whatever, and really just make it a monster. Yeah, so there's a pretty wide variety of things you can do with it, and so we're pretty happy with it.
Well, if
the rest of the game is pretty, I don't want to say vanilla, but if you've played war games before, like, nothing is going to stand out as like super weird, right? It's all going to feel very familiar, and that was on purpose, right? We want to draw in, war gamers, and we don't want to have them, to explain these complicated rules. You already know how to do this. You already know how to do this. But also people who may come from a role-playing game side of things and not play a lot of war games, we want to make it as easy for them, right? There's some things that just work, and why reinvent the wheel? But yeah, we felt Grit was a good way. If we're only going to introduce a few new things, Grit was the thing we wanted to spend our karma on.
Yeah, well, it was definitely. Unfortunately, if you have to use Grit to fix your screw ups, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
I'm gonna need some extra grit somehow. Yeah. I'm gonna need to, I don't know, I'm gonna need to purchase some extra grit for sure. So what else you got, Eric?
Do you want to get a little bit into the pyramid system? I think that was another thing that was a standout thing for us. Both of us kind of liked a little bit of your setup for that.
Yeah. That was the stuff I told y'all not to look at. So yeah, we can talk about that though. So we we had a gang creation system. I say had because it's sort of getting revised a little bit.
Okay.
But our gang creation system was essentially a bunch of ziggurats or pyramids where each individual gang had a certain amount of fortune that you could spend. Right? So you have build points for building your army. The same thing that you would normally do. So if you had 100 fortune or whatever, you could spend as much fortune as you wanted building up your gang, and those options would apply to your entire gang. Or you could spend those fortune points building up each individual model,
Gotcha.
right? And the gang stuff was obviously more expensive, and the model stuff was less expensive. But yeah, we had different, I guess, levels to that pyramid or the ziggurat, and you could only unlock the highest tier stuff if you had already worked your way up. I think visually it needed some work, and it wasn't entirely clear to everybody how it was supposed to work. So we're redoing it. And we're sort of taking a little bit of the complexity out while trying to leave the best parts of the option part, right? With the player choice and stuff like that.
Okay. Which is essentially every campaign game out there is building up your crew, whether it be by the whole crew or the individual, or which is again, if people are looking for games that they're going to string together, that's just more appeal for the game.
That's what you're saying is, go ahead.
That's kind of the RPG element of it, is as you progress through the story and your adventures that your guys get stronger.
Yeah. So that I was going to say is the campaign mode builds on that fortune system. So instead of just having a set amount of points that you get to build and then fight against your opponent, the campaign mode would be, for every time you did this or when you did this, you get this much fortune, and then you can go back and your gang and your individual models build up over time. Yeah,
that's just fun stuff right there.
It is. It's absolutely fun.
Because you just sit down and sometimes you just like, what am I going to do here? And then your individual models really begin to develop character. Because I remember back when Necromunda first came out, the very first iteration of Necromunda, doing that with my gang. With my really horrible plastic Necromunda models that came in the box, but playing this game and creating these wonderful characters and wonderful stories, losing eyes and the guy still being your sharpshooter, even though he's
so. How weird is it that your models being able to get maimed actually makes the game cooler?
Right. Exactly.
I don't really understand that, other than to say like there's when you add stakes to it. Like all of a sudden, like your decisions become a little bit more important. So it's not that like you want your characters to lose, but the fact that they can lose an arm or an eye means that you take it that much more seriously, and the highs are high and the lows are lower. So
and it's always fun to have somebody like with your example who loses an arm, but because of however you've spent everything, he's this monster in close combat.
Yes,
you just
exactly.
don't want to mess with him because he'll beat you with his stump or whatever he'll do.
And those are fun things. I remember, again, like I had big highs and lows doing tournament play, but I remember the times more when me and my friends were just playing like a little story game at home, and I had my little guy. I can still remember his name was Jurgen, the sorcerer, the chaos sorcerer. And I just remember Jurgen would make like 4 saving throws in a row. And in my head, that means, well, he's obviously touched by the gods. Right? And so,
clearly,
so, I wouldn't paint my main characters until they had done something fantastic in a game. And I rewarded them by giving them a nice.
Absolutely. I had a guy in Necromunda in my Orlok gang. He was called Fast Don. And he was named Fast Don from the beginning, and his speed ended up being 2.
Nice.
But he was Fast Don, so it was all that character stuff.
But you still remember that guy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, now we do have a hard question.
Sure.
This is a hard question. Maybe not as hard as your first character question. But we've always had developers struggle with this one because it's a good question.
Okay.
What's your favorite faction or character in Gangs of the Undercity?
Not even hard at all.
Oh,
My favorite faction is the Flaming Skulls, and my favorite character is Vengeance.
Okay.
He was absolutely my favorite from the moment I laid eyes on him. He is our first model, and he's basically an orc berserker with these two big axes, and from the moment I created him to the concept art to when he first landed in my hand as a metal miniature, I mean, this guy just rocks. I love him. I love everything about him.
It's a stunning miniature. He's probably the one that got me the most as I was scrolling down, because I kind of went past the elves. You know, I kind of gagged a little bit when I went past the elves because they're elves.
Absolutely.
But I've so far, that's me too. The skulls are those models. Well, I told you at the beginning, Spur is currently who I'm really looking forward to painting.
He's a fun model, yeah.
But that's mine too. Okay, well, that's actually two developers we've had not have a problem. We've had a couple of them that it's just hard when you create all of this stuff to pick a favorite sometimes.
I mean, like there's some great stuff going on the Valkyr side. I'd be lying if I didn't say that every time when I was playing the game, when Vengeance came up against Mormagul, like those guys just absolutely put on a good show when they're fighting. But it just hands down, the Flaming Skulls are way more my speed. Yeah. You know, like just the insanity and the explosions and the craziness, like they are absolutely everything I want in a game.
They're who I'm going to kick your butt with, Eric. Just so you know, just preparing yourself so you know who did it. So
well, I ain't going to bring any elves because I know you'll just come at me even harder.
There's another faction that's coming up. We're in the process of making the models for them, called the Bulls of Heaven, and they are all the larger humanoids, right? So you have what we call Yetin, and that's a sort of big grouping for Sasquatches, Yeti, Almaslar, bugbears, and those kind of things, right? And so they have all of those type of folks. They have a Minotaur on their team. They have a rogue Lawjack Golem, right? So like that team just is going to look very stunning on the battlefield because they're just going to be so much bigger and rougher than the others. So I'm looking forward to them too, in a totally different way. But yeah, those guys are pumping me up at the moment.
Those are the ones that are going to hurt my wallet.
Yeah, they're a little bit more expensive.
I just meant all of them, all the new games.
All of them.
Hurt my wallet. I'm very much a completionist. So
yeah, well, we also have an assassin type gang called the Shadowcast that's coming out, and I think actually at this point we've unlocked 3 more, but the minis themselves haven't been unlocked, for full gangs. So your wallet is a little bit safer than maybe if it goes too much longer, then
right. You still have 27 days left.
Yeah,
so.
right. That's if we do it like $1,000 a day, like we're gonna unlock another 10 models. So that'd be nice.
Well, 10 models, I could probably handle another 10 models.
Yeah, and we're bundling them in boxes as we gain the ability to have boxes of entire gangs.
Right.
Then we're starting to bundle them, and we're lowering the price if you buy the box bundle. So.
Awesome. What you got next, Eric?
Okay. We always like to ask our guests too, what game do they currently play? I mean, what are things that draw you to play? I mean, you've mentioned some RPG stuff, but what do you currently play?
Okay. I am currently playing a D&D game with my family since quarantine started. I have introduced my wife to D&D, and my kids are super pumped to play it. So that's awesome. The first family game we've ever played, which is kind of fun. I have a Shadowrun game that is ongoing because I do a Shadowrun actual play set in the 2050s, so set in the first edition. Okay. They're like doing all the classic adventures, for the actual play podcast. What else am I playing? I'm playing Earth Dawn. Are you familiar with Earth Dawn at all?
Familiar with Earth Dawn, yep.
So I'm playing an Earth Dawn game with the line developer of the current Earth Dawn edition, and that's on podcast as well. These days, you have to get me on a podcast before I have time to do anything. It's like, listen, like the stakes are up here, man. If it's not a podcast, I don't have time for it.
Right.
Let's see, what else? I'm doing a playtest game of our RPG that comes out whenever. I can't worry about when that comes out because I just got to get done with the Gangs of the Undercity stuff first. But we're playtesting that. That's called Subversion. I think that might be it. And of course, the games that we're playing of Gangs of the Undercity. Sure. And then of course I play Settlers of Catan and Ticket to Ride. Those are my sort of go-to when I don't have
Right.
anything else to do.
Right. The quick ones you can throw down with
Yes.
the family. Formula D for me with the kids. They're all over Formula D.
Yeah.
So we kind of already got your elevator pitch. So what's on your hobby desk? What are you working on, painting up and
So
building?
my hobby desk isn't here, or else I would show you. But I'm basically painting up terrain for Gangs of the Undercity.
Okay.
We had a really cool deal with Death Ray Designs, and they're creating our our terrain. But because of the circumstances in which we got together, I'll show you. This is kind of a fun story. So I had somebody that I was working with that was supposed to make a bunch of terrain for us. And then maybe about 2 months ago, he calls and he says, hey, listen, I have a problem. My partner sold the laser, so I can't do any more terrain for you. And I was like,
oh no,
oh, that's not great. Like we got Kickstarter coming up in like 2 months. What do I do with this? So I called a bunch of my buddies and I was like, hey, who would you recommend? Like, I'm going to have to pay for this. Obviously, this is going to suck, but I really need it now. And I really need this to come through. So they said, Death Ray Designs, go check them out. So I checked them out. I don't know if you go to, these hobby store type sites, and off to the top right, there's always the flag that tells you what currency you're in, right?
Okay.
And it was in pounds, and I was like, oh no, I can't do this. Like they're overseas.
right?
I don't have time for this, right? So I went back and said, like, no, they're overseas. They're like, no, they're not overseas, idiot. Like they're in North Carolina. And I was like, oh, okay. So I reached back out to them, and I said, hey, listen, here's the situation. We got a Kickstarter coming up. My terrain guy backed out. What are the chances that you can work with me in creating some terrain for the Undercity? And he's like, well, yeah, let me think about it. So I sent him kind of all the lore documentation for Neo Babylon. And like 2 days later, his name is Austin. 2 days later, Austin says, hey, I made up some mock-ups because I had the time. What do you think? And like, they weren't mock-ups. They were like an entire like half table of terrain. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's awesome, right? And I was like full speed ahead, man. Like, once and I didn't talk about money with him. I was like scared. I was resigned. So like, whatever, I'll just pay whatever, because I need this on my table.
Right.
And I got back to the end, and he says like, no, I'm not going to charge you for making this stuff.
Wow.
as long as we can just continue to sell it. And I was like, I wasn't going to try to sell it. I mean, that's exactly what I had hoped for that you would say, right? You just continue to sell our terrain on your website, right? And we'll do this for the Kickstarter. We'll give discounts on the Kickstarter stuff, but like, absolutely, that'd be awesome. And ever since then, he has just been like, our biggest supporter. I mean, it's so easy to work with him. We've got some really cool stuff. I wish I could. Can I share my screen with you? Is that something I can do?
Yeah, hold on 1 second. I can give you that ability to do.
I got some signs that he just.
Yeah, the stuff that you have pictured on the Kickstarter just looks beautiful.
It is amazing. Yeah. Oh, I remember. I tell that story because it's only been a couple of months, right? And so by the time he got done making it, he didn't have time to like do a great paint job, and I didn't have time to hire anybody to do it. So that's why I'm doing the stuff up. Yeah,
I got you. Should have an option on the bottom to share screen.
Let's see here.
And that will, what we'll go ahead and do then is that's an amazing story, and that's great hobby community working together. So we'll make sure we throw up a link to Death Ray Designs website. Anyway, I have some of their stuff as well.
Yeah.
So here we go.
Okay, can you see that?
Yep, those are the acrylics, right?
Yeah. This is the Fragging Unicorns logo.
I see that. That's awesome.
Let's see what else we got. And this is we have a kebab shop.
Awesome.
So that's going to be one of them. Let me see what else we got here. There's some logos that we've been
nice.
Here's some more. So the crowbar, a metro, and then this is a crowbar opening up a beer bottle.
Nice.
And then this is our metro sign for the bus stop. So yeah, and it's just been so much fun working with him on that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know how to not share my screen now. I don't know how to unshare. I'm oversharing.
Just go to the top.
Okay.
There you go. I can stop you. No worries.
Do it.
There
Stop
you go.
me. Somebody.
I have the control. I have control. I can.
And that right there, just terrain itself, that's another attractive thing for me, is that you can, like you said, Mac, you can cut out your own little, district, your little couple blocks with that, their kind of designs. You know, it's so open, the world.
Really.
Yeah. Death Ray Designs, and I want to pump them up again because what they're doing for us is modular, but it's also compatible with all of their modular stuff.
Right.
So you can absolutely take some of their stuff, any stuff that they have, and mix it with our stuff, and you could just create an entire, you could create like a catacomb, right? Or like a huge cityscape or whatever you want to do, make it look amazing, and you wouldn't probably have to have the same piece twice.
Yeah. That's awesome. And again, we'll throw a link up for Death Ray Designs too, because whenever we hear stories like that, because I know Death Ray Designs isn't a huge company either, that they're a smaller company, so they kind of qualify in the indie invasion kind of part.
Absolutely.
We'll definitely pump them up as well and throw a link up and let people know that they're doing cool stuff and working so awesomely within the community. I'm just going to make words up about how amazingly
amazing, awesome.
Yeah,
awesome, amazing.
Before, and they're very easy to deal with and put together and stuff.
Yeah. They're beautiful. He did Austin did a video which helped me a lot. Actually, I Googled how to paint MDF stuff, and surprisingly, there is not as much as you would want. Yeah, right? Especially not about the stuff that would be like easy for somebody who's like, okay, listen, I have a Kickstarter and I want to share this awesome stuff. I need to know how to do this easy and cheap right now.
Yeah.
There's none of that. But Austin actually did have one where it's just like, hey, if you have 2 cans of paint, like here's how you do this. And it turned out wonderfully, right? So I gave it the the spray can treatment, and then turned it upside down, shot it with some brown, and it looks, like it's muddy on the bottom. And then I turned on a couple of my lightsabers from Saber Forge for that, cyberpunk lighting, and took a couple of pictures, and it actually ended up looking really great. So
awesome. Eric, you got that last question for us, buddy?
Yeah. So to let our listeners know, where can they find this game? Of course it's on Kickstarter. So and you have I did the math till August 15th, is it?
Yeah, August 15th. Running? Yeah. So that's the primary way. We don't have any retail outlets yet.
Okay.
As far as like game shops. However, we have had at least 5 retail shops reach out to us, and we haven't done any of our retail outreach yet because, frankly, if I'm speaking completely honestly, we just didn't know what we're doing half the time. And I don't say that in a dismissive way, because we learn quick and we're learning on the fly, but there's just a lot that you don't know and you don't think about when you start a company. And one of the big things that you don't know is who your product is aimed at, or like, you have a vague idea, but there's going to be certain game shops that buy your stuff and that promote your stuff more than others because it's just what they're into. And I don't know who those people are yet.
Absolutely.
I have some leads that I need to follow up on, but 5 people have reached out to me, 5 game store owners have reached out to me and said, hey, we want to have your product. So I created a retail tier today to accommodate them. Yeah. But for right now, you can get it on the Kickstarter. But when the Kickstarter is over, and once we've fulfilled everything from the Kickstarter, we're committed to fulfilling everything from the Kickstarter before we sell anything else.
Right.
But once everything fulfills, we are going to have the availability to buy any of our stuff on our website.
Good.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Well, of course, we'll have links up for those in the description.
Yeah.
And there's also a small, at the moment, Facebook fan group. So
yes, I saw that. That was really cool.
So that was, that might have been me.
Nice.
I have a propensity to do that when I see an indie game out there, because that's how it's an easy way to share. Because in the groups, people can share what they're working on and their contributions to it. So it's always fun to have that. So hopefully that will grow up, and we'll throw a link in the description to that.
Thank you for that. That's so fun.
Oh, absolutely.
I got a real giggle out of that. I was like, look at that.
Yeah.
We have a fan page already.
That's why we have the cool t-shirt.
That's awesome.
That's why we have the cool t-shirts. And shameless plug,
Excellent.
Coffee mugs too. But Opti, thank you so much for being with us today. It has been an absolute blast. We've had a lot of fun and learned a lot more about gangs of the Undercity. And unfortunately, every time we get done with these, I just want more of it. It's just, I got to stop doing these because I can't play all these games. I got to stop doing the interview.
You got to pick one.
I won't.
So tell us which one it is and why it's Gang of the Undercity.
Oh, not fair. Not fair at all. Not fair at all. There's so many great indie games out there.
Yeah,
that I just love. When it really comes down to it, to be honest, we really just love supporting the community because, as we've said in almost every single interview that we've done, you guys are what every gamer wants to do. They want to create their own game because that's part of why we do it. It's just a good thing we're not all doing it because it'd be a lot of really bad games out there.
Yeah,
so,
that's fair.
So for those of us,
life's too short to only play D&D.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love D&D, but life's too short to only play D&D.
Absolutely. And there's way too many cool models out there to not want to paint a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for being with us. We really appreciate it. We'll have all the links up in the description. Eric, would you like to close us out today?
No, you got that list.
Oh, I got that one. Okay, because we have a list. So, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. As usual, you can find us in all the regular spots. This one will be up on YouTube, but once it goes on to Podbean, you'll be able to find us on Google Play, Spotify, iTunes, Pocket Cast, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Podbean, obviously, and TuneIn. Those are all the places you'll be able to download and listen to the podcast portion of it. All the links will be up. I encourage you to go and back Gangs of the Undercity.
Yeah, check it out on Kickstarter.
Yeah, even if it's just for a couple bucks, just to support the process of the independent games. But just telling you now, you won't be able to do that if you scroll down because there's some pretty sweet models in there, and you probably won't be able to just back for $1. So get in as far as you can, get in as deep as you can, so that I'm not alone in the indie invasion world of doing that. And again, thank you so much, Opti. And remember, guys, as you're playing those games out there and having fun and exploring all of these independent games, to prepare yourself for the invasion. See you later, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.